Star Wars comic number 1 was released on Veve the other day, and the prices are significantly higher than some other comics in the app that have way more physical value in the real world. So what can we learn from this drop, the prices that are going on right now, and how should we adapt this moving forward when it comes to our own strategy? Let's talk about that. Welcome in everyone, my name is Andy and I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come watch this video on the channel. Just before we get going, if you are enjoying the content and you want to support me further, you can hit the subscribe button, and if you want to support me further than that, you can join the membership. If you've been paying attention to Veve, you've been on Veve, you've checked some of the stuff out, you just saw that they had released Star Wars Comic 1, released in 1977. Now, at the time, obviously Star Wars was becoming quite big, it was becoming quite popular all across the world, and today we know it as a $10 billion plus company that was purchased by Disney only a couple of years ago. So it is really interesting to see how truly popular this comic is in the physical world, how people are treating it within Veve, and then maybe what we can learn from it moving forward. Before we get into all of it, let's first have a look at the comic itself, sort of the history behind it, and maybe why its significance is important for the history of the beginning Lucasfilm and Marvel, and how it obviously progressed from there. Here we have two different areas that talk a little bit more about Star Wars and what it was as a whole when the comic book was actually written. I'm going to read this for you because I think it's actually really important to understand some established background of this story of what Star Wars actually was. Star Wars 1 in 1977 was the first comic book since Dell's Uncle Scrooge in 1960 to top 1 million copies sold. And Star Wars did that in 1997, not through its initial sale to newsstands, but also through a newsstand reprint and at least 3 waves of bagged reprints offered to department stores through Western Publishing's Whitman arm. Sales of the bagged edition of the movie adaptation were so strong, according to former Marvel editor and chief Jim Shooter, the Western temporarily suspended its program of printing variant editions of the Marvel titles to focus solely on Star Wars reprints in late 1977, and at least the first 3 issues of the 1977 series all would have topped 1 million copies and possibly more. The interesting thing as well, that in Marvel in the 1970s were actually quite close to filing for bankruptcy as seen here. It does go on to say that Star Wars has 2 books that are prized and have value. First is obviously the standard Star Wars 1, a popular issue produced, and the other, which is the much more hyped one, was the 35-cent variant, and some copies of the issue were 1 to 4 were printed with the 35-cent variant as well. And Marvel often done that to test sort of the price increases, to see price elasticity, to see if people would actually be alright with this price increase happening. And we can see that over the long term, the prices of these 9.8s and 9.4s and so on have actually decreased when it comes to the 9.8 for the 30-cent one, the one that was actually released on Veve, and the 35-cent one, with a way higher return for the higher grades. What we are observing with Star Wars, the 35-cent variant, is that power of low print runs. Bottom line, if something is overproduced, it is worth much less. And both of these books were probably sporting better returns prior to the movie Star Wars The Force Awakens. This really does go to show the popularity of the Star Wars comics, what this allowed Marvel to do as they progressed. And it wasn't to say that Marvel then instantly took off, as DC actually had an incredible time throughout the 80s for their comic book releases. It seems here that DC had their DC implosion is what they had made it in the 80s, so I'm guessing there were still a lot of hardships as they progressed forward with this, but being able to gain so much attention with this comic book shows wonders of how popular this is now. We're enough 40 years in advance with people enjoying the movies and a culture built on loyalty. If we have a look at the sort of value of the 30-cent one at the time being anyway, we can see that grade 2 goes for around $25, 9.4 200, and a record sale of 40,000. And again, if we go to Go Collect, we can see here that a 9.6 grading of the 30-cent variant is going for about $1,100, and obviously goes to about $85 with a 2.0 grade. And of course, these are both pretty heavily used when it comes to the sort of pricing, so I'm guessing we're going to see something in the middle of those. But we have actually viewed things being on Veve have increased their sort of demand as people were wanting to get their physical and digital counterparts for that sort of stuff. I already know a few people who have purchased the Star Wars Comic 1 who have in their house because of the one released on Veve, and I'm guessing that's going to continue. As I said before, Star Wars is a 10 billion, or has made over 10 billion in the worldwide box office revenue, and they sold it off to Disney. I think it was around 4.7 billion at the time, shares and just overall ownership of the company. But that has significantly increased, I'm guessing, over the last few years that they've been able to do so, and actually been able to establish the brand further through Disney's movies and the franchises they have been creating. Let's then move on to the pricing of what these are going for right now. And you obviously see on the screen as I show you, but the common itself is going for around 66 gems at the moment. The uncommon is going for around 86 gems, and we've got the secret rare going for around 1.7, 1.8. And the interesting thing with this is if we go to something like Strange Tales 110, which was actually released very recently, and this is the first appearance of Doctor Strange. Now, the common is going for around 23 gems, the uncommon's going for 25 gems, and the secret rare about 1.5k gems. If we head on over to our trusted websites of Go Collect, you can see that the price of a 9.2 is 58,000 and a record sale of 66,000 for Strange Tales 110. And Doctor Strange's box office only had around 677 million for the movie, and with the new one out, I'm guessing that's going to do quite well too. What am I trying to take from all of this then? Well, if we're actually looking at fan bases and what's actually happening here, we can kind of see that Star Wars, even though it is incredibly less popular when it comes to comic books, is wildly more popular on the Veve app and way more expensive, near enough 3 times the expense of the commons and uncommons for the Doctor Strange first appearance and the Star Wars first appearance. Even though a 9.6 grading is going for around $56,000, whereas a 9.6 grading of the 30-cent edition is only going for around $1,100. For me, this is telling me a few things. One, we've not truly got comic book collectors in this space that are extremely knowledgeable of what comic books are, how popular they are, an outer sort of sphere of Veve and NFTs, and just a better overall understanding of the market. So this means that attention grabbing things are what are really going to get people to actually want something. Star Wars, most people know. You're going to ask anyone in the world, sort of the biggest franchises, the biggest movies in the world, Star Wars is probably going to be up there. Doctor Strange, on the other hand, maybe not so much, but there were a lot of first appearance characters in Strange Tales 110. To me, this does show how much this can actually shift markets purely on the basis of hype alone. And we've saw this happen time and time again with things like C-3PO and R2-D2 that have been released in the golden moments, as well as some of the other things like the Steamboat Mickey and the partner statue for the Disney stuff. Releasing things at certain editions, keeping them low to keep it scarce and demand high, is really interesting to see the prices that these have actually taken. With Doctor Strange and Strange Tales 110 being so much more expensive than the 30-cent variant, and even more expensive than the 35-cent variant on the market right now, it's so interesting to see how we are valuing these comics and how other people are paying attention to them, why they're buying something, and maybe why they're holding something too. One thing that I'd also considered further was how much of a role Star Wars had played in our lives compared to something like Doctor Strange. Taking the example because they were both released basically at the same time. Obviously we could do things like Spider-Man and that sort of stuff, but I'm going to do that because they were released pretty similar dates. It's quite easy to compare them, and just in general we're going to be able to understand this further as a market. Star Wars has grown loyalty over decades now and has moved around a fair few times. We've now got a lot of series coming out. Obi-Wan's going to be coming out at the end of this month. There's a lot of attention on Star Wars and a lot of nostalgia for what is going on. And again, Doctor Strange 2 has come out in the last few days, probably doing exceptionally well at the box office, but it's not quite the same as what Star Wars has been able to do as a whole. So to me, what I'm finding with this and what I'm seeing with the market is how much hype is actually making these decisions for people. Instead of something that is extremely more expensive in the physical world, a completely different game in the Veve marketplace. And this is how the market moves. It's not dissimilar to the way the actual real world moves. We've discussed this before, and I know some people might be a little bit upset when you are comparing the physical to the NFT format, as we're obviously talking about things like the 9.6 gradings, things that are quite rare on that behalf. But even when we're talking about the lower gradings for the 2.0, when we come to the Star Wars sitting at about $25 or $45 depending on what you're looking at, even if we look at Strange Tales with the 2.0, we're still looking at $2,400, exceptionally higher than a 2.0 grading for the Star Wars comic, and actually sitting higher than 9.6 of the Star Wars 1 for the 30-cent variant. What I'm now going to be doing moving forward is really trying to pay attention solely to the way people react to certain things. If something like Star Wars is coming out for the first time, it has got such a big brand and such a loyal collectible following behind it that they are probably going to buy everything and anything they possibly can from it at whatever price that it actually sits at. Now, do I believe that Strange Tales will increase over the long run? I do, because of how popular of a comic book it is, once people learn a little bit more about it. And hey, maybe we even have some more comic book lovers that come into Veve over the next few years after they see what the company are trying to do. There's also another little side thing that I was really interested about, and it was something that I'd actually read on one of the articles that we talked about today, and it was how Marvel had tested their 35-cent variant as a sort of understanding of whether or not people are willing to pay a little bit more than maybe other things. And that might come into mind when you saw that you had to pay $15 for this Star Wars 1 comic. They knew the hype that was going to be behind it, they added a little bit more additions to it, and now is even more expensive than something that is exceptionally higher in price in the real world. But what do you think about this Star Wars comic? Are you going to be changing your strategy based on the prices that they've been able to show over the last few days, or are you sticking to what you're going with right now? Be sure to let me know down below. I know the video on the screen will be something you'll love to watch. Have a fantastic day.